Everybody, welcome back to another fantastic episode of Ready to Die Fighting. I'm Chris, and today I want to do something a little bit different. Um, Quite different. I want to give you a little bit of a history lesson. Uh, we just read this book on Harriet Tubman. This is the Who Was series, the #1 New York Times best-selling series, an official Who HQ book by Yona Zeldis McDonough. I'm not sure. And I really like this series of books. They are very easy to read. They're kids' books, young reader books. They are below Nate's reading level, but they give you these great, it kind of like in a story format, very interesting to read about all these different people. Some of them are, um, kind of historical figures, but also they have modern day celebrities, political leaders, and it's not just who was. They also have like where is and what was. So, what was the Gettysburg Address? What was Stonehenge? What is NASA? What is Lego? Who is Elton John? It's just all these. It's a huge series, all these different people and places. We read Who Was King Tut, and it's just they're very informative. They're easy to read. They're not very long, but they're long enough to give you a good amount of information. They present it kind of like as a story, and then they also include their bibliography of where they did their research, and they often give you a timeline of kind of like what was going on. Sometimes in the world as well as I shouldn't say sometimes they give you a timeline of what was going on in the rest of the world. Um, and how it works into the story. So that was one of the things in history class that I always kind of struggled with is it felt like everything was happening in isolation when a lot of times all this stuff was happening at the same time. Um, so yes, you have kind of random things in here. You got Herman Melville publishes Moby Dick in 1851. The California Gold Rush happens in 1848. The Southern states secede from the United States. A Civil War breaks out. And so these various things that are happening, and then where, um, at what point in Harriet Tubman's life, these things were happening, and so that's nice. They also give you, they have these inserts here that kind of just break away from the story, and so if they mention a person of significance in the story, they give you kind of like a little cutout and explain who those people were and give them a little background. And so they mentioned Frederick Douglass, and Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass were friends. They knew each other, and so here's a little excerpt of about his life. Additionally, they have the Frederick Douglass book, which the boy wants to read next. So I really, really like these. And so this is definitely not going to be a book review channel, nor is it a book review video. I wanted to talk about Harriet Tubman specifically because, she's someone who I knew about, but I never really dug into her and found out, like, just truly how amazing she was. And I mean, she is life goals for preppers. I mean, she is the, I dare say, the perfect survivalist and prepper and hero. It's just amazing the things that she knew. And so I kind of want to just talk about that, just how amazing she was, but also how um, she really had it all. Like the things that I'm trying to learn how to do and the skills that she had, or the skills that I'm trying to acquire and learn, she had them. And she did it without the internet. She did it without even knowing how to read or write. Um, and that's just astounding to me. So let's just talk about this a little bit. And I have two copies because one is in Spanish and one is in English. And so the boy reads the English version, I read the Spanish version. We talk about what we've read, and so this is me kind of double practicing because I'm really trying to crack down and really get my Spanish down. That's one of my goals for the winter. So hopefully by spring, my Spanish will be top notch. And this is one of the ways I'm working on it. So let's dive into Harriet Tubman a little bit. Um, she was born a slave in Maryland around 1820. They don't know for sure because who cares what day and year a slave was born? They're barely even human, right? Um, and so they kind of talk about in this book, what life was like in Maryland back then, just, you know. And so it turned out Harriet, little baby Harriet, had to work as a child as a slave, and she wasn't good at everything. She was not particularly good at sewing and kind of those fine tasks like that, sewing and weaving, and she got in a little bit of trouble. She was a little bit rebellious. She always had dreams of escaping. And her father, they talk about Nat Turner's rebellion, and so that was something that inspired her. Um, but her father kind of saw this spark in her, and he taught her how to navigate by the stars, specifically the North Star, to go north and escape to freedom. So he taught her navigation. He also taught her something that I thought was really fascinating, and I need to add to my list. He taught her how to move through the woods silently. Like that was pretty important for her. And I think we talk about all these various bug out type of scenarios. We talk about, even hunting and things like that. Being able to move through the woods silently, that was something that, kept her alive. She would not have been able to do the things that she did without that skill. And I think that definitely applies to us as preppers, especially outdoors people and people who do plan on bugging out and have plans like that, moving through the woods silently. Especially with two dogs. That's going to be really hard. Two dogs and a boy. That's going to be hard for me. But that's something that we need to start working on. So he taught her that. He also taught her that the dogs that would potentially be chasing her can't follow a scent as well over water. So she would travel in the water as much as she possibly could. So just having that knowledge, again, without being able to read, without going to school, without YouTube or anything, she was able to learn these things and remember it. So he taught her this in childhood, and she retained this information until she needed it. Additionally, she was a good worker, and people seemed to like her a fair bit, her owners, and she requested to actually work outside with the construction crews, and request granted. And I don't think there was a whole lot of women out there, and she was small in stature. However, she learned to chop wood. She learned how to build. She was digging ditches. She became very, very strong. She became very, very tough. And she acquired all this knowledge of how to build things and construct things. And pretty amazing. A lot of people nowadays don't have that skill. She was also very brave, and she believed in standing up for other people and protecting others. There was a slave who tried to escape. She actually stood up in front of the guy who was trying to capture him and defied him, basically. She didn't. He wanted her to help him catch her. She wouldn't do it. She blocked his path, and she ended up getting severely injured due to it and suffering some brain damage. And so I'm kind of like skipping ahead here. So yeah, she got to the point where she was able to work as a slave, but also she was doing her work so well and getting it done quickly and all that, that she was able to do extra work and actually earn money. Now, she did have to give part of that money to her owner, but she was able to keep some. And she, financially literate. She was saving this money and being smart with her money. This is a woman, I'm jumping ahead here, but it's just this is going to come back later. So she's saving her money, she's picking up all these skills, she's learning how to navigate and all this in preparation to escape. And she understood, she was good at reading who she could trust, and she knew what was going on. She kind of had her ears open. Sounds like she was a quiet woman, and she listened a lot. And she learned that the Quakers were anti-slavery, and she met a Quaker woman and opened up and talked to her a bit. And every time this woman came through the plantation or town or whatever, she would talk to this woman and found out that she was an abolitionist and she had a safe house. And so she just retained all this information. She's planning, and preparing. She's she's like the original prepper. The she's preparing for her escape, and the key was she had to wait to the right time. And when that time came, she escaped alone because she couldn't trust the people around her to go with her. And sometimes that's something we talk about in the prepper community. What about our friends or family members who um, aren't preppers, or they make fun of us, or how do you get them involved? How do you make them? Sometimes you can't. Sometimes you can't. And so a very petite young woman goes off in the middle of the night on her own with only what she could carry, basically some food and a blanket, following the North Star to freedom. And she was successful. She met up with this abolitionist who guided her onto the Underground Railroad, and using all these skills, moving silently, walking through not through rivers to cover her trails. She was incredibly clever. She would disguise. Talk about gray man. She would dress up as a man sometimes. She would dress up as a fancy lady sometimes to avoid being caught. At some point, there was a reward for her, and because she was going back after she escaped slavery, she started going back to get her family members and her friends, and then eventually total strangers. Rescued, I think, 300 some odd slaves. And at some point, there was a reward for her capture, but people knew that she didn't know how to read or write. So she would carry a book with her, and she'd sitting there. She evaded capture because she sat there, pretended like she was reading a book, holding it upside down. And they walked right by her and was like, oh, that's not her. Harriet doesn't know how to read. Man, tricky. She's tricky. She did whatever she needed to do to survive. She left her family because she knew that she needed to be free. She wanted to be free. And if no one was going to support her, if they weren't going to come with her, then she went alone. And then once she got up north, she worked, got a bunch of money. One of the things she bought? Well, the first thing she bought, a gun. Harriet carried a pistol with her at all times, and she knew how to use it. She wasn't afraid to use it. And once she saved up some money, got her supplies, got everything she needed, felt comfortable, she went back for her siblings. Then she went back for her parents. Then she went back for other people. And so on it went. Dozens of trips, eventually moving on up north, even up to Canada. Originally, she was just going to New York, but as laws changed, as people were looking for her more, she went further north up into Canada, making bigger and bigger journeys, higher risk. But she was smart. She knew what she was doing. Eventually, the Civil War broke out, and Harriet then realized she could rescue even more people by helping out in this war. So she was actually recruited by, who was it? I forget his name, Montgomery, I think. And she became a scout, essentially a spy. She became a spy for the North and, collecting intelligence, talking to slaves, getting more information, scouting out different locations. There's literally nothing this woman couldn't do. And she eventually became commander of intelligence and had white men reporting to her. And she led attacks. She strategized and led these attacks that made significant impact on the way that the Civil War went. Without Harriet, perhaps the Union might not have won. Once she got tired of being a scout, she did it for a couple years, but that's hard work, right? She went back to New York, I think it was New York, and she became a nurse and was eventually promoted to head nurse. And her mother was an herbalist. And so Harriet remembered This woman remembered the herbs and tonics and things like that that her mom had used on her when she became sick, when she was injured. And she used those same ingredients. She went out, she scouted around, found the herbs and plants that she needed, made these concoctions, and they worked. She healed people of dysentery. They said if Harriet was by your side, you weren't going to die. And she was eventually promoted to head nurse. So here we have a black woman born a slave during pre-Civil War area. She's head nurse of a hospital. She's commander of intelligence of the United States Army or the Union Army. She eventually started owning property. Once the war was over, she bought houses, she bought land, she became a gardener and farmer. She was taking in any escaped slaves and housing them, helping them find work, giving them whatever support they needed. She was giving speeches she traveled around giving speeches and talking to people, getting them to end slavery and understand what was going on. She helped with the women's suffrage movement. It was almost unending, the things that she did. And I'm really just kind of skimming at the surface of all this. But I absolutely loved reading about her in detail because there was a lot of things that I didn't know. And even the things that I did know, when I look at it in the mindset of a prepper, she really had it all. And so I very much encourage you to read about Harriet Tubman. It's fascinating, it's interesting, and it gives me a lot of new perspective. Another thing that she did is she worked as when she was in the working with the Army. She worked as, I wouldn't say an interpreter, but there was definitely a divide between the former slaves who were fighting in the Army and the white men who were fighting the Army. She worked as a middleman. She taught the former slaves how to, because slaves were used to taking orders. They weren't allowed to think for themselves. So they were expecting to being told what to do at all times, and they didn't really know how to work independently. And the white men, of course, didn't really know how to work with the slaves as, I guess, people and equals and all that. So she worked as a middleman, and she was able to communicate with both sides. She taught the white men how to work with the slaves or former slaves, and she taught the former slaves how to think for themselves and how to be independent. She taught the women how to work and sew and get jobs, and then she taught the men how to, think for themselves and fight and be useful in this army. And so there's just so many aspects of this that I think are important to being a prepper. The navigation, the moving in silence, the planning, the waiting for the right time, the strategizing, the medical side of things, the herbalism, farming and gardening, being able to communicate and coordinate with diverse groups of people. And then there's also the combat, firearms. There's so much. There's so much there, so many layers. And so that's why I'm trying to think of a woman, even opening up to a person who I think embodies the idea of survivalism and prepperism, and basically who just accomplished more than she did within their lifetime, especially considering she was a Black woman. Being just a woman back then was difficult. Being a Black woman was even more difficult. A Black woman who couldn't read and who was born a slave. She had so much against her. And so I'm trying to think of somebody who accomplished more. And I'm having a hard time coming up with anybody. So I'm nominating Harriet Tubman as the original prepper. I don't know what kind of award I can give her, but read about her, become inspired. She's given me a few things that I think I need to work on to better improve myself for survival, and some things that for me to consider, like her passion to help others. Because even though I'm big on helping myself and my family, and I often do, it's like, well, I have some extra food in case somebody else needs a Band-Aid. I'll have some. But much of my planning, I should say none of my planning includes going back to help others. Um, and so that's kind of maybe making me rethink maybe what some of my goals should be. It's something that's kind of like, yeah, I mean, I want to have some extras just in case I encounter someone who needs some help. I'm fine with that. But I'm not planning at this moment anyways to seek out those I can help. And so she's definitely leading me to think maybe I need to rethink that. So, a little bit different video, but hopefully you guys find it interesting and you enjoy it. And if so, like it, subscribe. Definitely pick up, at the very least, this book. Because, I mean, you can read it as an adult. You can finish it in probably 30, 45 minutes. And if you've got kids, it's a great read for them. Tune in to the next video, and I'll see you guys next time.